I've always been the model student my whole life. Valedictorian of high school, undergrad at Berkeley in 3 years. I had internships at the White House, top law firms. I graduated with like an AA plus average. I went straight through to law school at NYU, where I got in. I applied to transfer to Harvard and Stanford, and I was accepted to both. I go to Harvard, I graduate, I'm 24 years old. It's like, this is it, right? This is what everyone works so hard for, right? The best job, the best school, the best grades, all of it. Well, there's another side to my story that, frankly, I don't even think that my younger self realized was so painful at the time. And it starts in high school when I had stomach aches that were induced by the stress of SAT prep. It continued in college when I had such bad anxiety that I didn't even realize was anxiety. I just didn't know it was a thing. Magically, it just wasn't a thing for me. Like me being a 28-year-old millennial, like in my generation, like, no, the word didn't exist, at least for my education. And I was valedictorian, remember, so I studied, but no, it wasn't a thing. And I didn't socialize with people. And I was alone like 95% of my time. And it was not a fun experience for me. I got the best grades possible, but it came at a cost. I was not happy. I hung out with my high school friends on Skype a lot, and that was great, but in-person stuff was not there. You fast forward a couple of years, and I'm about to graduate undergrad, and I'm going to say trigger warning. It's going to be some conditions related to anxiety discussed, specifically gagging. Before I know it, I'm gagging uncontrollably. I have no idea why. I feel I'm going to throw up. I go over to the toilet. I'm like, okay, let's just vomit. I guess that's what people do in the movies. Nothing happens. And I suffered through this for 5 years of my life, not knowing what's going on. I go through the medical system. They do all sorts of tests. I get an endoscopy done under anesthesia every time. Julian, you look fine. Like there's a little bit of excess stomach acid, but we really don't know what's going on here. And it was only 5 years later that I really, really pushed myself to think like maybe mental health is somehow behind this. And let me like explore, how do I manage my stress? Like, what are my stressors? How do I manage them? And let's see what happens if I accept the fact that this is being induced by my mind. And magically the issue went away, which was great until the pandemic hit. And that's when things got very, very dark for me, because in the pandemic, first of all, let me say the pandemic has been really tough on everybody. There's no one that has been exempted from the trauma that this thing has caused. But for me, myself, I was working in big law, long, rigorous hours. I was isolated from the world. I saw basically no human beings all the time. In California, the wildfires locked us inside, and then COVID prevented us from going, the wildfires locked us inside, and then COVID prevented me from going somewhere else inside at everyone else's house or, gym or movie theater. And I was completely alone. I didn't know how to manage my anxiety. And that is when I began to try to control everything in my life, ultimately leading to trying to control my own thoughts. And that's when I became depressed. And this was December of 2020. So we're not talking that much long, 14 months. And it was at that moment that I decided I'm going into mental health services, and I'm just like, you tell me at this point, because I've tried everything to not be miserable. I've done all the things that I feel like our society has told me to do, and something's not adding up here. And that was when I was diagnosed with severe anxiety and mild depression. And so since then, it's been a lot of learning and retooling my mindset, these thought patterns that are 20 years deep ingrained that I'm still to this day working on. I quit my job in large part to focus on this journey for myself, because I weighed the options, and for me, it was more important. But in addition to that, I've also been leading what I'm calling a mini church movement for now in mental health via TikTok and Instagram and Discord and Twitch, and basically anywhere I can to reach people and tell them that they're not alone, and remind people that you have other people around you to support you. And also remind people that there's always two sides to success, and you should never assume for a second that that person that you think has it all really has it all, because you never know. And that's exactly what my LinkedIn purports to be, if you look at it, until you see and you hear my story behind the scenes.
Like looking back, what could have people around you done, or in what ways could others have peer supported you?
What I tell people about my past self is like, if I could tell my past self anything, like, I'm very stubborn. So I think that's part of the problem here. Don't get me wrong. Okay. Like, it's not just a mental health education problem. Like, it's also me just being hard-headed. Like, no, it's probably my stomach. It's not mental health, whatever. And the stigma definitely does not help. Okay. So I'll put that out there. I would just tell people, educating yourself and learning, there's nothing that's ever going to come out of that experience poorly for you. You can get learning what is anxiety, right? What is depression? Just understanding the signs, understanding the way they show up, understanding why they show up, understanding how to manage them at a basic level. I think that would have gone a long way for me, because again, in college, when I was overcome by crippling social anxiety, I didn't even know I was. I thought everybody had that sort of because I saw that people had some insecurities, right? So I was like, oh, well, I guess everyone just has something. Not to my level. Now I know. I'm like, no. What I was experiencing was not at all chill, right? But I didn't know that. And I was trapped in my own mind, unfortunately, and I didn't know. So, and I would have known had we had the resources we have today. Like these Instagram pages run by therapists that have all the different signs, like what you are building here, Maddie, with your community and educating you guys and just talking to each other. So I think just pushing folks to learn, because there's no way to overcome the stigma. That has to be done on your own, unfortunately. But I think learning about the space objectively will help kind of seed that notion.
Also curious if there's certain things that helped you the most, like certain breathing techniques, certain types of therapy, medication, like what worked in kind of helping get you out of that time and into a more stable place.
Yeah, it ranged. Like it continues to range. Let me first say, like, deep breathing is my number one. I do that all the time, as often as I can remember. Just take a deep breath. Literally, I mean, I know, Kelly, you were talking about the importance of diaphragmatic breathing, like incredibly important. I remember when I first started doing that, that was the first thing my therapist and I worked on. I was like lightheaded after doing deep breathing for like 2 minutes. I'm like, dude, what? Like, how long have I been screwing up my lungs for? Right. And of course, your brain health and everything. So, of course, breathing, journaling for me was incredibly important and helpful. When I felt overwhelmed, it helped me understand how I felt. And prior to that, I would always kind of turn to other people and be like, oh, this is how I feel. Blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, that would be my mode of self-expression. Journaling allowed me to do it on my own, which of course I think is how it ideally should be. Those are probably my top two. But honestly, I would say taking walks outside with no screens, cutting out social media, cutting out people who are weighing you down, frankly, because mental health, I think in large part, it's a journey that you need to find the people who can support you in the right ways. As much as you want that to be some of your best friends or your parents or your family, it's not going to be them. I can tell you, right? Every single person in my life that I thought would be helpful in one way, maybe they weren't, and maybe they were helpful to me in a different way. So find those people that work for you, and do not guilt yourself when you think about like, oh, like, this person, I wish I could. It's not your responsibility, right? This is all about boundary setting too. It's what Miss Kimberly was saying. Like, boundary setting is all about you, not the other people. So don't ever guilt yourself either, which I know it's certainly something that I struggle with, right? But the most important thing I'd say after all of that is whatever you do, you got to practice, and you cannot expect to have journaling or deep breathing or any of these things, in my opinion, help until you've done it maybe 3 to 4 weeks consistently. You just can't. And for me, deep breathing the first few times kind of helped, but it only really started making me feel like my thoughts would slow down and like I would calm my heart rate after weeks of practice. And the same thing with journaling. And the last thing I would add is don't ever expect these tools to work every time. That's not how it works, unfortunately, right? We're very complex creatures, and like our moods are very complex, and we have a lot of complex tools too. And we live in a very complex world. I mean, look at this. I'm talking to you through a camera with a Jin's face is printed up there, by the way. Yes, that's Jin from BTS, if anyone was wondering. It's a complex world we live in. And so you need to practice your tools and understand how to use your tools for you and when you need them. And that will never go away. That practice and that understanding, it will change, and that's okay. It's been changing for me. So long-winded answer, Maddie.
Great answer. Thank you so much. Thank you. And then Carla asked, was the pressure of the world and your success making you stressed, family issues, or any other external factors? Can you recall where the mental health issues or when they started?
It's a good question. I think for me, and this is still the case, I think 98% of the pressure comes from myself. Now, where does it come before it gets in my own brain somehow? I would argue our socialization. At least I'm here in the US. I think the US has definitely a culture of hustle to the top and like win, win, win. And it's very competitive, and that's great. But unchecked and without managing our mental, it's really not great. So I would argue a large part of it for me was the external factors. My parents have been very supportive, and they've always told me, just do the best you can. If you get B's, that's fine. And so it was not them who was forcing themselves to stay up late in high school and destroy themselves in college. It was me. And Carl, to answer your question about when the issue started, I think for me, they got a lot worse in college. In high school, I think I was in a controlled enough environment that the stressors I handled them in stride. But in college, I didn't know at all that I was being afflicted by anxiety, and it was preventing my ability to communicate and to just do things. And so that's when things got a lot worse.
I want to know how the diagnosis process was.
It's similar to Kaiya in that a lot of questions, filling out a lot of forms. On the question of fear, I think the irony for my situation or my story is that I was so done and just burnt out, and like I felt like I had nowhere to go, that I was like hopeful for the words, like even though there was some fear in the sense that like, okay, like this is there's a lot of uncertainty here, right? Like I don't know what the words are going to be. I don't know what the path forward is going to be. At the same time, I knew that it was the only path forward that I had for me that was different than the one I was on. And so I think for me, the hope outweighed the fear, so to speak. And certainly after going through my experiences with, gagging through my 20s and not figuring that out, I was much more inclined to trust the word of mental health and focus on it.